Matt, not one but two Australian World Cup winners broke the all-time record for the most expensive purchases in an IPL auction. First Pat Cummins, then Mitchell Starc. How well do you think they'll do? Because Pat Cummins is sort of a known quantity in IPLs. He's played quite a lot. His record is fine without being outstanding. Whereas Mitchell Starc is someone who's not actually played that much T20 cricket full stop since he last played in the IPL, really, which is nearly a decade ago. He's only played 38 games in 8 years. So why have those two guys gone for so much money?
Well, yeah, I mean, Starc didn't play in Australia's final game of the T20 World Cup in 2022, which they needed to win to go through and win handsomely, and they decided to pick Kane Richardson instead. So it's quite a turnaround for him to suddenly, 12 months down the line, be the most expensive buy in IPL history. I think in terms of why they've gone well, it's pretty obvious that they've both had good World Cups. In Starc's case, I think he's been someone that a lot of IPL teams have sort of wished would have been available for a long time and hasn't been. And in Cummins' case, his stock has clearly risen a lot over the past 12, 24 months. But to be honest, I think the main thing is these mini auctions. I think it's easy for people to see that players have been sold or unsold at the IPL, and they think that they sort of get the idea that the franchise owners sit down in a room and draw up a list of who do we think are the best T20 players in the world in order, when actually it's nothing really like that. It's a load of teams sat there acting in their own self-interests and filling gaps in their squads. I mean, the majority of franchises retained in the region of 15 to 18 players from their squads last year. Maximum squad size is 25, so they had a few gaps to fill. And the majority of teams would have ranked Starc and Cummins as the standout fast bowlers in that auction. It's not like franchises are saying, we think Mitchell Starc is 6 times the T20 bowler that Chris Woakes is. It's a case of supply and demand. And I think Cummins is quite a good case study, really. If you take it in isolation, as you say, it looks, hardly believable. I'm not doubting his caliber as a captain or an all-format cricketer, but in T20 alone, as you say, last time we played in the IPL, he was in and out of the side for KKR and went at 10 and over. But if you look at what the two teams that were bidding for him wanted, it starts to make a bit more sense. Where RCB, who were sort of the runners-up, I suppose, in that lot, needed an overseas fast bowler because Josh Hazlewood's unavailable for most of the season. They said openly afterwards their top 3 options were Starc, Cummins and Alzari Joseph. They had money left and they were willing to, potentially compromise on some other buys to lock that player in. And then Sunrisers, who bought him in the end, at the start of the auction, they bought Head for 6.8 crore and Hasaranga for 1.5, which was a bit of a bargain. So they might have allocated more like 15 crore between those two. By the stage Cummins' lot came up, they had 21 players in the squad out of a possible 25. They only had one overseas spot left. They identified their top target and thought, why not just use all of their budget on it? It's not like in the context of the cash that is around in the IPL, if you look at TV deals, what the franchises are worth, an extra, a couple of $100,000 Australian dollars is going to make much of a difference to the owners. So why not throw all your money at your top target? And yeah, every chance he captains them and does very well.
There were hints of World Cup recency bias elsewhere. Daryl Mitchell, someone who's barely played in the IPL, he will be 33 at the start of the competition, not got an incredible T20 record behind him. He went for a whopping 14 crore to CSK. T20 is such a data-driven format, and during the World Cup, a lot of people were talking about how the 2 white ball formats are perhaps being conflated too much. Why is there so much put on World Cup performances? Is it as simple as recency bias? Because, you look at some of the batters who weren't picked up or went for much, much less money. You wouldn't say that Mitchell is markedly more impressive as a T20 player.
Yeah, I think there's a certain element of that, undoubtedly. I mean, every franchise, every owner, every coach, every assistant coach, every analyst will have watched every game, or the majority of games at that World Cup, and will be, whether or not intentionally so, will be very aware of the fact that Daryl Mitchell has had a very good tournament in Indian conditions. And I suppose that is the particular relevance of the 50 over World Cup, despite the difference in format, is that if you're consistently performing against the best teams in the world over a 6-week block in 50 over cricket, there's clearly going to be some transferability there, and I think particularly, I actually thought that Mitchell innings in the semi-final of the 50 over World Cup, bit of a tangent, was one of the innings of the tournament, and I hardly had a word written about it or anything the next day, because it sort of paled in comparison to the Indian juggernaut rolling on towards the final. But clearly there's a huge element of that. I mean, Travis Head's T20 record is nothing at all to speak of in the last 3 years. I think he's got 1/2 century in that time. But we all use our eyes as well as crunching the numbers. And I think most people would say that while Travis Head, you can't expect him to be peeling off 100 every IPL game he plays like he did in the World Cup knockouts. You also probably recognise that he's probably a better cricketer than his recent T20 record suggests. So there's probably a happy medium to be struck between the numbers and the eye tests. There might still be a phase of evolution in the IPL, or maybe in 10 years' time we'll look back on some of these buys and think, what on earth were they doing? Obviously, none of that was going to work. But you can see why teams fall into the temptation of seeing players play very well against leading bowling attacks in the world in relevant conditions, and then decide that they're the player they want.
I'm going to ask you about a couple of English players who weren't picked up in the auction. About half an hour ago, we got a press release in saying that Adil Rashid has gone to the top of the T20I bowling rankings. He's someone who I think English fans have been confused as to why he's got so few IPL deals over the years. And I guess what is often said is that there are so many high quality domestic wrist spinners that overseas wrist spinners aren't valued as much as maybe fast bowlers, perhaps. But I look at some of the squads there. I look at some of the squads in after this auction that look short on high quality spin. Tom Curran, for example, got picked up by RCB for 1.5 crore. Rashid's base price is 2 crore, and RCB had money left in their purse at the end of the competition. And I wouldn't say RCB have a high quality wrist spinner in their squad. Mumbai in a similar situation. We know how good Rashid is. Why is it that he's so rarely gets a go in the IPL?
I think, as you say, it's mainly about the sort of dynamics of players and player types almost who are picked up. I think if you look at this auction, there were very, very few bids on overseas spinners full stop, and someone like Wanindu Hasaranga, who is probably easier to sort of fit into a team in that he can probably bat a couple of spots higher than Rashid. He went at his base price of 1.5 crore, which is hardly anything in the context of some of the salaries that went around. I think a lot of the times, IPL teams will sort of identify what they think their starting balance is going to be. So whether that's 2 overseas batters and 2 fast bowlers, whether that's 3 overseas batters and 1 overseas fast bowler, and very rarely will a team, with possible exception of probably Gujarat Titans with Rashid Khan there, very rarely does that seem to include a sort of frontline overseas spinner who's not going to contribute with the bat. So I think Rashid is probably unfortunate. He's probably he didn't have an amazing IPL season for Sunrisers this year. He didn't get many opportunities either, so that may be counted against him. And I suppose also, there's an extent to which, having put his base price at 2 crore and being a bit of a known entity, maybe that counts against him in some respects. You can see why it might be attractive to a franchise to try and sign a mystery spinner, and someone like Noor Ahmed, for example, gets a gig. He's probably a bit cheaper than Rashid. He probably offers something a bit different as the left arm wrist spin option, and is sort of the idea of having a potential and high upside is quite attractive, whereas Rashid is probably a bit more of a known entity. But he's definitely unfortunate not to have played a lot more than he has in the IPL. And
is Phil Salt unfortunate not to get a gig given the form he's in?
Yeah, absolutely. He had a pretty good season for Delhi last year, and I thought, to be honest, even more unfortunate than him being unsold was just being released in the first place. He basically got an opportunity because, firstly, Rishabh Pant wasn't there because of his car accident, and secondly, because Prithvi Shaw was horribly out of form, which meant that he came into the side and Delhi sort of changed their overseas balance after, I think, 5 or 6 games. But Salt did really well, so unlucky not to be retained there. And I think if you look around again, there wasn't much demand for for top order batters in this auction, particularly ones who didn't bowl, particularly right-handers as well. There are a couple of teams, I think Sunrisers with Head made mention of the fact that they felt they needed more left-handers last year because they were easy to line up. So really unfortunate. I think will be one of the top picks as a replacement this year. There will inevitably be some injuries around, and you'd think, especially in the context of back-to-back T20 he's probably one of the most unfortunate players to miss out. So with the T20 World Cup coming out, I'm sure he'll be desperate to get himself out there as a replacement. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if he ends up playing, half an IPL season at least, despite the fact he doesn't currently have a contract.
Another trend, I guess, from this auction was that there were some young Indian players who people might not have heard that much about going for quite a lot of money. So Samir Rizvi at Chennai, he's their 5th most expensive player on their books at the moment, in between Moeen and Dhoni. There was also Kumar Kushagra, 19-year-old wicketkeeper at Delhi. He's their 4th most expensive player at 7.2 crore. I guess it's quite interesting that players with basically no professional records are going for so much money, right? Without going into the individual backstories of these different players, why do you think those players are valued so highly?
Well, I think partly there wasn't a huge amount of top domestic talent available at the auction this year. So it probably made sense that teams were looking to sort of to use their scouting networks and to try and find a hidden gem rather than going for known entities who are in their 30s and been sort of proven non-performers, if you like, at IPL level. But I think one of the other trends that we've seen is that a lot of these sort of smaller T20 leagues that exist now in India are reaching a point where they're a little bit more professional, and more to the point they're televised. So they're easy for scouts to be able to actually watch and access in a way that they weren't previously. So, in the sort of early days of the IPL, if you weren't performing in the Syed Mushtaq Ali Trophy, where not every game was on TV, then it might have been quite hard to actually get in front of anyone, get anyone relevant seeing you bat. Whereas now, you can be a teenager playing in the Uttar Pradesh T20 League or in the Tamil Nadu Premier League, and people are able to watch it at the click of a button. So clearly the sort of scouting network has evolved. So yeah, there was some huge money sloshing about for some players that might not even hardly feature next year. There's no guarantee that someone like Samir Rizvi will break into a title-winning Chennai squad, but maybe they're hoping that they can form a bit of relationship with him, and down the line, obviously, there's a mega auction next year, so it might be tricky to keep hold of him. But maybe they'll sneak him through as their lowest prize retention if they think he's something really special, and see whether he's a guy with a big future or not. There's also, I should also point out at this stage, that there's also a big history of random uncapped Indian players going for big money in IPL auctions and then never really doing anything. So it's not a guarantee that just because he's gone for a lot of money that he's going to be the next superstar.
Yeah, I just find the pay dynamics really interesting in that you've got some players like Rinku Singh who may well be starting for India in the T20 World Cup that takes place weeks after the IPL. He's on something like 10 times less money than some of these kids who've barely played professional cricket because KKR got him on a good deal last year, a good bit of scouting, etc. I find that really interesting. Just finally, what are your thoughts on the overall what the squads look like? Who do you think now you know who will be playing for everyone? Who looks strongest on paper, do you think?
Well, I think the auction has served its purpose to a large extent, in that I think the squads look generally quite, you can sort of plot a route for the majority of teams as to how they would go well. The sides that sort of stood out, I think Mumbai Indians I think they finished 3rd in the end last year because they won the first knockout match and then fell short of reaching the final. But they did that with sort of a scratch bowling attack. So with that trade of Hardik Pandya coming in and effectively replacing Cameron Green, that's opened up an ability to field 2 overseas fast bowlers in every game. They'll probably go in with potentially Gerald Coetzee and Dilshan Madashankar, along with Jasprit Bumrah, who's back from injury. So that looks like a seriously strong team. The other one that sort of stood out to me was Rajasthan. I think they obviously just missed out on the playoffs last year, came second the year before that. But they look a really strong side to me. I think it's a similar core. Rian Parag, who's a sort of perennial underachiever at IPL level, but very, very good in domestic cricket, has had another good year in the side Mushtaq Ali Trophy. And yeah, Rovman Powell, I think, is a pretty good signing there as another finisher, along with Shimron Hetmyer. I expect both of those will probably start in the early stages of the tournament. So those are the two teams that sort of stood out. But obviously, Chennai and Gujarat have reached the final last year and have got pretty similar cores. And there are a few sides where you can sort of plot a route for them to be very successful.
And finally, just on Rajasthan, there's the name of Tom Kohler Cadmore, an uncapped English player. It's not that often that you see uncapped English players picked up in the IPL. You spoke to him recently. He's had a low-key, really good year, sort of at the B-tier tournaments.
Yeah, he's someone where whenever you click on a scorecard of a random T20 league on ESPNCricinfo, you can generally see his name, and often sort of springing up for several different teams in the same week. It feels like. I think he did have a week at the start of this year where he played for 3 teams in the space of 8 or 9 days in 3 different leagues. He's become. He's had a slightly strange career. Obviously, he left Worcester under a cloud and was involved in that case back in the day. Then he sort of had a bit of time at Yorkshire. He's unusual, I suppose, at the age of 29 and having played for 3 different counties. But in the winters, rather than the old lot of the uncapped English player of hoping to get on a Lions tour or playing some great cricket overseas, he sort of tours around South Asia, scores runs for fun, and has become one of the sort of unlikely stars of the Abu Dhabi T10 as well. I know that's a favourite of pod listeners, but he's the second highest run scorer in Abu Dhabi T10 history, which is a noble status to hold, of course. But yeah, teams are clearly noticing, and good news for him. I think he'll be the backup to Joss Buttler to start with, but he's probably an injury away from getting a real crack at it on the big stage.
And also, he's a proper middle order batter as well. He's not necessarily a lot of the highly rated young English uncapped players tend to be openers. He's someone who does a lot of his business in the middle order. Cheers for your time, Matt. Much appreciated. Catch you soon.